Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The wind howled through the jagged mountains of the northern wastelands, carrying with it the biting chill of a winter that never seemed to end. Snow whipped through the air, stinging Hart's face as he trudged onward, his leather boots sinking into the deep, frozen drifts beneath him. His breath came in ragged gasps, fogging the air with each exhale. Yet, despite the icy cold and the unforgiving terrain, Hart pressed forward, driven by something he couldn't yet explain, a pull, a calling that resonated in the very marrow of his bones that he had never believed in legends. Not really. As a wandering swordsman, he'd seen enough of the world to know that most grand tales were little more than fanciful stories told by old men in taverns to pass the time. Yet this was different. The old hermit had spoken of the throne with such conviction, his eyes gleaming with the fervor of someone who had glimpsed the truth. The throne, the old man had said, lay hidden in the heart of the northern mountains, forgotten by time, shrouded in myth. Only a true king, a leader worthy of its power, could unlock its secrets. Hart had dismissed the man's words at first, chalking them up to the ramblings of a crazed hermit. But something about the story had lingered in his mind, gnawing at him until he found himself making the journey north. Now, after weeks of traveling through treacherous lands, he was here, standing on the cusp of something that could change everything. That he paused, resting a hand on the hilt of his sword, his gaze sweeping across the snow-covered expanse ahead of him. The sky was an endless sea of gray, the horizon barely visible through the blizzard that raged on. There was no sign of civilization, no hint of the ancient city the hermit had described, only an unrelenting wilderness that threatened to swallow him whole. A low growl sounded from behind him, and Hart instinctively spun around, his hand tightening on the sword's grip. Out of the swirling snow, a large, shadowy figure emerged, an enormous wolf, its fur as white as the snow around it. Its eyes, however, were a bright, piercing blue, glowing with an unnatural light. Hart braced himself, his muscles coiling in preparation for the fight. The wolf circled him slowly, its massive paws crunching the snow beneath it as it stalked its prey. For a moment, the two locked eyes, each assessing the other, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, with a burst of speed, the wolf lunged, its jaws snapping toward Hart's throat. Hart moved with practiced precision, dodging to the side and drawing his sword in one fluid motion. The blade sang as it cut through the air, catching the wolf on its flank. The beast howled in pain but didn't slow down, circling around for another attack. This time, it leaped high, aiming for Hart's chest. With a grunt, Hart raised his sword, using the flat of the blade to deflect the wolf's attack. The force of the blow sent him stumbling back, but he quickly recovered, pivoting on his heel and driving the blade into the wolf's side. The creature let out one final, agonized cry before collapsing into the snow, its body twitching before going still. Hart wiped the sweat from his brow, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. He'd faced many creatures in his time as a swordsman, but there was something different about this wolf. Something ancient. He crouched beside it, examining its glowing blue eyes, which now flickered weakly as the life drained from its body. "What are you guarding?" he muttered to himself. The wolf's eyes dimmed completely, and Hart rose to his feet, sheathing his sword. As he did, something in the snow ahead of him caught his eye, a faint shimmer, barely noticeable in the swirling blizzard. It was as if the very air was bending around a hidden doorway, a portal to another world. The hermit's words echoed in his mind. The path will reveal itself to those with the courage to see. Hart took a deep breath and stepped forward. As he approached, the shimmering grew brighter, until a doorway of pure light appeared before him, its edges lined with ancient runes that glowed with an otherworldly energy. Without hesitation, Hart reached out and touched the door. It rippled beneath his fingers, and then, with a soft hum, it opened. On the other side was a city, an ancient, crumbling ruin, buried beneath layers of ice and snow. The grand towers that once reached for the heavens now lay broken and shattered, their glory long forgotten. At the center of the city, atop a massive stone dais, stood the throne. Hart felt his heart skip a beat. There it was, just as the hermit had described. The forgotten throne. He stepped into the city, the snow crunching beneath his feet as he made his way toward the throne. The air was heavy with the weight of history, the echoes of a once great empire lingering in the ruins around him. As he approached the dais, a figure stepped out from behind one of the broken pillars. "About time you showed up," a voice called. Hart's hand flew to his sword, but then he saw her, a woman, dressed in thick furs, her dark hair pulled back into a tight braid. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, sized him up with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "Who are you?" Hart asked, his voice wary. "Elara," the woman replied, crossing her arms. "And you must be the one the hermit spoke of." Hart narrowed his eyes. "You know the hermit?" "Know him? He's the reason I'm here." She glanced past him, toward the throne. "That, and I've always had a thing for ancient relics." Hart wasn't sure what to make of her. She didn't seem like a threat, but he'd learned not to trust anyone too quickly. Still, there was something about her that intrigued him. Before he could respond, another figure appeared, this one a hulking man with broad shoulders and a scar running down the side of his face. "Corinne," the man said in a gravelly voice, nodding toward Hart. "I was told I'd be fighting alongside a king. You don't look like much." Hart's grip tightened on his sword, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he met Corinne's gaze, his voice steady. "Looks can be deceiving." Corinne smirked, his hand resting on the hilt of his own blade. "We'll see." Before Hart could respond, the ground beneath them rumbled, and a deep, resonant voice echoed through the ruins. "Only the worthy may claim the throne." Hart's blood ran cold. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, reverberating through the very air around them. He glanced at Elara and Corinne, both of whom seemed unfazed by the sudden change in atmosphere. "This is it," Elara said, her voice low. "The trials have begun." Hart nodded, steeling himself for whatever was to come. He had come this far, there was no turning back now. As the ground continued to shake, the ruins around them shifted, the broken pillars and crumbling walls rearranging themselves into a massive arena. At the center of the arena, the throne remained, untouched by the chaos around it. A voice boomed once more. "The first trial, courage." From the shadows of the arena, a figure emerged. It was tall and cloaked in darkness, its face obscured by a hood. In its hand, it held a sword, its blade glowing with a faint, eerie light. Hart drew his own sword, his eyes never leaving the figure. He knew this would be no ordinary fight. This was a test, one that would determine whether he was truly worthy of the throne. The figure lunged at him, its movements impossibly fast. Hart barely had time to raise his sword, deflecting the first strike with a grunt. The force of the blow sent him stumbling back, but he quickly regained his footing, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure pressed the attack, its strikes coming faster and faster. Hart parried each one, his muscles straining as he fought to keep up. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to land a hit on the figure. It was as if the very shadows were working against him, slipping through his defenses like water through his fingers. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. Was he really worthy? Could he truly defeat this ancient guardian? No. He couldn't think like that. He had come too far, fought too hard to give in now. With a shout, Hart surged forward, his sword cutting through the air with renewed vigor. He focused on the figure's movements, looking for any sign of weakness, any opening he could exploit. And then, he saw it, a brief hesitation in the figure's stance, a fraction of a second where its guard was down. Hart seized the opportunity, driving his sword forward with all his strength. The blade pierced through the figure's chest, and for a moment, everything went still. The figure staggered back, its hood falling away to reveal a face that was not human, gaunt and skeletal, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. But then, slowly, the light in its eyes faded, and the figure collapsed to the ground, dissolving into a cloud of ash that was quickly swept away by the wind. Hart stood there, panting, his sword still raised. He had passed the first trial, Elara. "Corinne," he called out, looking around for his companions. Before he could find them, the ground rumbled once more, and the voice boomed again. "The second trial, wisdom." The arena shifted again, the ruins rearranging themselves into a labyrinth of twisting corridors and towering walls. At the far end of the maze, the throne stood, bathed in a soft, golden light. Hart sheathed his sword, his mind racing as he considered his next move. He knew this trial wouldn't be a test of strength, it would be a test of intellect, of cunning. He couldn't rely on brute force to get through this. He would have to outsmart whatever traps lay ahead. As he stepped into the maze, the walls seemed to close in around him, the shadows lengthening and twisting into strange, disorienting shapes. Hart kept his hand on his sword, ready for anything, but as he navigated the maze, he quickly realized that his strength alone wouldn't be enough. Ahead of him, strange markings lined the walls, symbols and runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Hart recognized them. They were ancient, a language long forgotten by most. But not by Elara. He needed her knowledge now. "Elara," he called out, his voice echoing through the maze. To his relief, her voice came from just ahead. "Hart, over here." He hurried toward her voice, rounding a corner to find Elara crouched beside one of the walls, studying the runes with a focused intensity. "Looks like we'll need a bit more than a sword to get through this," she said, glancing up at him. Hart nodded. "What do you make of these markings?" Elara frowned, tracing her fingers along the runes. "They're a code, a kind of puzzle. If we can decipher them, we should be able to find our way to the throne." Hart watched as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration. He had always admired her intellect, her ability to see things others couldn't. It was what made her invaluable on this journey. After a few moments, Elara's eyes lit up. "I've got it. Follow me." She led him through the twisting corridors, stopping occasionally to study more runes, adjusting their path with each new discovery. Hart trusted her completely, knowing that without her, they would have been lost in the maze forever. Finally, after what felt like hours, they emerged from the maze, standing once again before the throne. But their trials were not yet over. The ground shook beneath their feet, and from the shadows, a massive figure emerged, a guardian unlike any Hart had ever seen. It towered over them, its body made of stone and metal, its eyes glowing with a fierce, golden light. "The final trial, strength." Corinne appeared at Hart's side, his sword already drawn. "I've been waiting for this." Hart grinned, drawing his own sword. "Let's finish this." The battle was fierce, the guardian strikes powerful enough to shake the very earth. Hart and Corinne fought side by side, their blades flashing in the dim light as they worked together to bring the giant down. For every strike the guardian landed, Hart countered with a precise blow of his own, using his agility to dodge the creature's slow, lumbering attacks. Corinne, on the other hand, relied on brute strength, meeting the guardian's blows head-on and using his sheer force to push the creature back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Hart saw an opening. The guardian reared back for another strike, its massive sword raised high above its head. Heart darted forward, driving his blade into the creature's exposed chest. The guardian let out a deafening roar, staggering back as cracks spread across its stone body. Then, with a final, shuddering breath, it collapsed to the ground, its body crumbling into dust. Heart stood over the fallen guardian, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. He had passed the final trial. "The throne is yours," the voice boomed, echoing through the now silent ruins. Heart stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the throne. It was a grand, imposing structure, made of gleaming metal and stone, its surface etched with intricate runes. As he approached, he could feel the power radiating from it, a deep, pulsing energy that seemed to resonate with his very soul. He reached out, his hand trembling as it touched the cold metal of the throne, and then, in an instant, everything changed. The throne glowed with a blinding light, enveloping Heart in its energy. He could feel it coursing through him, filling him with a strength and knowledge beyond anything he had ever known. It was as if the very essence of the ancient kings flowed through his veins, their wisdom and power merging with his own. He was no longer just a wandering swordsman. He was a king. As the light faded, Heart opened his eyes to see the ruins around him transformed. The once broken city was now whole again, its towers rising high into the sky, its streets filled with life and energy. The throne had awakened, and with it, the empire it once ruled. Heart turned to Alara and Corinne, both of whom stood in awe of the transformation. He knew what he had to do. "The empire will rise again," he said, his voice steady and sure, and so, it began. Heart, the last true king, would rebuild the human empire, using the throne's power to unite the scattered remnants of humanity and restore their former glory. But the trials were only the beginning. The true challenge lay ahead. Ruling an empire was far more difficult than winning a throne. As Heart stood before his new kingdom, he knew one thing for certain: this was his destiny. And he would not fail.